to catch up. My name's Ashley Pinelli. I am the Associate State Director at 9 to 5 Colorado, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today and just share some of the lessons from Colorado's paid leave victories and talk about our path forward in the state and nationally. I'm really excited to be co-facilitating this event with my incredible partners at A Better Balance and Good Business Colorado. And I just want to also give a shout out to folks on the call who are with us today, who had such an important role in the Colorado wins. You all know who you are. Thank you for your consistent support and joining us today for this conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to my co-facilitators to introduce themselves, a little bit of background about who they are and why they're part of this conversation, the role they played in the paid leave wins. And then you'll hear from each of us a little bit about different perspectives about how we got to where we are today. So again, I'm the Associate State Director at 9 to 5 Colorado. I co-chaired the Colorado Families First Coalition, the coalition to lead the ballot win, as well as the Colorado Family Coalition, which was the coalition that led the legislative effort in Colorado for many years. Paid family and medical leave and paid sick time has been a top priority for 9 to 5 Colorado, and we've been leading on this front for many years around the movement building and organizing work in this realm. From there, I want to pass it to Chris, then Deborah, then Jared, so that we can just kick it right off to Jared. He can roll right into his presentation. So with that, I'll hand it to Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Garcia. I work with 9 to 5 Colorado, and I also work with 9 to 5 on the national level. And I'm also involved with Paid Leave for All, working on the national campaign for paid leave. I got invested in this in 2009 and have been part of helping as much as I can with pushing towards this legislation that finally came to fruition here in Colorado, and now also working on it on the national level. And I'll pass it to Deborah.
Hi, I'm Deborah. I'm the Executive Director of Good Business Colorado. We've worked very closely with 9 to 5 on paid family and medical leave, even before our organization existed as a organization. And I was pregnant at the time we formed our organization. And so this issue has been very personal for me as well, in trying to comprehend how any woman would be able to make it through having a child without access to paid leave. And I'm excited to talk through a little bit about our role in the campaign over the year. I co-chaired the legislative coalition with Judith and then Ashley, and we were an active steering committee member in the Prop 118 campaign. And I'll kick it to Jared.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Jared Make, Vice President of A Better Balance. And I'm going to go ahead, since I'm presenting first, and start sharing my screen. And here we go. Just to introduce myself, I'm Vice President, as I mentioned, with A Better Balance, and we're a national legal advocacy nonprofit with 4 offices in New York City, where we're based, Nashville, Washington, D.C., and here in Colorado, where I am. And we're working, you can see some of the policies where we're doing legal work around the country, and I'm especially involved in paid sick time and paid family and medical leave. And we've been working for many years with the coalition in Colorado on legal issues, research, bill drafting. And I'm especially involved on the ground since I'm here as well, and help to draft both of the policies and wins that we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to kick things off with a little bit of a 101, and I'll share some resources after the call So that'll include a lot more of this information, but I'm just going to start with a basic overview of our 2 victories. So starting first with paid sick time, our paid sick time law was signed by the governor in July, and Colorado became the 13th state to pass a paid sick time law. And what's really exciting is Colorado set a new standard for the movement in a number of ways that we'll talk about. So there were 3 parts of the paid sick time law. The first part was just through December 31st, so no longer in effect, but from July until December, Colorado's law covered all of the coverage gaps in the federal emergency paid sick leave that also sunset on December 31st of this past year. And then there are 2 permanent parts of the law going forward that kicked off on January 1st. So first there was permanent accrued paid sick time, which we'll talk more about. And then the third aspect of the law, and really one of the ways that Colorado is now a model, is that there's supplemental paid sick time for public health emergencies, including COVID-19, but also future emergencies down the road. So a little bit about the paid sick time law. Workers began accruing their regular paid sick time on January 1st for general health needs for themselves and family. The really one concession in terms of the legislative compromise to get this through was there is a 1-year delayed effective date until January 1st of next year for employers with fewer than 16 employees. However, and this is really important as we'll turn to next, but there's no delayed effective date for public health emergencies, which of course is very important this year. Really important, and another way that the Colorado win is a real model is that there's universal coverage. And workers accrue their paid sick time at 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, and it can earn up to 48 hours per year. And another way that it's a new model is that Colorado, along with New York's new paid sick time law, don't have a waiting period on use for your time. You get to use it as you earn it. Which is a new development in paid sick time laws that we're really excited to see. A few other things, this includes safe leave for domestic violence and sexual assault purposes, has an inclusive family definition, which Chris will talk a little bit more about, but really just ensures that you can care for loved ones, even if you're not biologically or legally related to them. Reasonable documentation can only be required after 4 or more consecutive days of absence. And importantly, that documentation requirement is waived during a public health emergency, like we're in right now. And then the law has very strong collective bargaining agreement language and strong enforcement and private right of action to be able to go to court. So, as I've been mentioning, this really exciting aspect of Colorado's law, and one that I know a lot of other states are interested in right now, is that on the date a public health emergency is declared, employers have to immediately supplement workers' existing earned paid sick time with additional time off. And that has to allow, on that date that the public health emergency is declared, immediate access for full-time workers to at least 80 hours of paid sick time. And part-time workers must be able to take an equivalent amount that's proportional based on how much they work. There's no delayed effective date, as I mentioned, which means, as you'll see at the bottom here, the Department of Labor has confirmed that COVID-19 emergency leave has been in effect since January 1st, regardless of business size. So it means that every worker in Colorado right now has access to 80 hours of paid sick time if you're full-time, again, proportional if you're part-time, that can be used for COVID-19 purposes. So really huge, and probably the strongest paid sick time access for COVID in the country right now is here in Colorado. And then just, a few key factors, and my other panelists will talk more about this, but, the sick time campaign really was on the heels of years of organizing, and Ashley will be sharing more about this. But really the emphasis of organizing over the years on paid leave, especially making sure it's equitable, inclusive, and universal, is just something that really has been through the years emphasized by advocates in Colorado, and just became part of what was expected as this law moved through. Strong public support, this was backed up by polling, which certainly was used to make the case for how popular paid sick time is, especially during the pandemic. And then certainly COVID-19 played an important role in sick time moving. This effort was in the early months of the pandemic. And I think it's just a reminder that, obviously we're in a different phase of the pandemic now, but there's still ways to, based on what the needs are, based on what we're seeing federally, to think about the real opportunity for states to lead and protect workers in the community. And then just to mention sponsors, an interesting takeaway from the sick time campaign is that, we did have sponsors that really threw down to make sure this remained a universal policy. It really helped that our sponsors were in leadership. The Senate Majority Leader was a lead sponsor, as well as the House Speaker. And then an interesting takeaway for me, having worked in so many states, is that Colorado as a citizen legislature, where legislators, have other jobs, that we had both a Senate sponsor who is a small business owner, so did speak about, his own experience as a business owner and being shut down at the beginning of the pandemic. And then we had a lead sponsor in the House who's a pediatrician who really was able to make the public health case in a very compelling and personal way to her colleagues. And the public health case, of course, was really important in this campaign. So what's next? We recently finished rulemaking, really strong rules on the paid sick time law. And then just a huge need, and you'll hear this from others as well, for public education. We really need to make sure that there's support and the ability for workers to find out what their rights are, and to ensure that businesses also understand their obligations and get the support they need to meet the law's requirements. And then enforcement, we're going to be working very closely with the Department of Labor here and workers' rights groups to make sure that when there are violations, that those violations are being addressed. So I'm going to turn now for just the next couple minutes to a quick overview of Proposition 118, our other big win this year in Colorado for paid family and medical leave. And we won on election day by over 15 points. And as you can see, these two maps, the one on the left is Proposition 118. Green were counties that voted in favor of Prop 118. And then on the right are presidential elections, where blue were the counties that the Biden-Harris ticket carried. And if you look, there's, I believe, 7 counties that went for Proposition 118 that Trump won. So, the results really showed that the polling we've been seeing for years on paid family and medical leave are accurate. It has really strong support. It's bipartisan. This policy won by huge margins, around 50 points in Denver, in the urban areas, and then won a number of, the suburban counties, and then some of the rural counties. And one that I often like to mention is Weld County on the top right in Northeast Colorado, where Trump won by 18 points, yet Proposition 118 eked out a victory. So really large margin, showing the bipartisan appeal of this policy. So a little bit on how it works. You can take leave under this for your own serious health condition, to care for a family members, to bond with a new child, to address certain military family needs, and then safe leave purposes for domestic violence. Almost all employees are covered, and self-employed workers can opt in. So again, the universal coverage being so important here. And workers will be able to take up to 12 weeks in a 12-month period. And workers with certain pregnancy and childbirth related health needs may receive up to an additional 4 weeks of benefits. Some other key features: there's progressive wage replacement, which means low wage workers will receive more of their income, which is a really important aspect of making this an equitable and accessible policy. Workers will receive up to $1,100 per week initially as the cap on benefits, but that'll be adjusted based on the statewide average weekly wage in future years. There's job protection regardless of business size once you've been with your employer for 180 days. Again, we have another inclusive family definition that includes chosen family, which is really huge that both laws won that. And then employers and employees split the cost here 50-50, although employers can pick up more than that share. And employers with fewer than 10 employees aren't required to pay their 50% employer portion. And that was something that the ballot campaign really thought was important to our success, the ability to talk about this being a shared cost, as well as some relief for small business, especially against the backdrop of the pandemic, that was a popular feature. So what's next? Premium collection will begin in January of 2023, and then benefits begin a year later. And in that remaining time, there'll be a lot of startup for the program. So there's a new family division at the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment that's staffing up as we speak. There'll be a number of steps for funding the program, and we do have a complicated fiscal landscape here with our taxpayer bill of rights. So a number of steps to secure bonds and to ensure that funding is in place. So that's being worked on now. We need to just play defense, be vigilant, make sure that any bills that are introduced to try to weaken this get defeated, which there will be a very strong coalition to make sure the will of the voters is respected. Rulemaking later this year. And then as we get closer to the launch, public education will just be critical. And then the last thing that I just wanted to raise is the role of research was really important here. So we had a family and medical leave insurance task force that the state created, which ended its work about a year ago, last January, right as the ballot effort was kicking off. And I was one of the folks who was appointed to the task force. And will say, if you're considering task forces in your state, please reach out. I have lots of thoughts. I think potential pitfalls, challenges, just things to keep in mind. But the task force here ended up being really useful because we were able to get a consensus from a very diverse group with very divergent views on this policy on some of these key components. And those recommendations were used for the ballot initiative. So we were able to point back to this body. We received a huge number of public comments just showing the level of support. We collected expert research and we were able to make the case that this has worked well in other states, which was so important. And then this last piece, the task force did an actuarial study, which was huge because it just showed what we know, which is that as in other states, these programs are solvent, they're stable, they work well and have been successful. And we were able to use that study to push back on some really misleading and false information from opponents of the policy. So thinking about how to do that type of actuarial work is something that I think will be important for the movement as we go forward. And I'll just end there. So a couple of links, but we'll send out a follow-up email with a number of fact sheets and overviews of the laws after we're done. So thanks. And I am going to stop screen share and turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you for setting that up, Jared. And, I'm going to talk a lot about the organizing work that went into winning these policies over the years and some of the lessons learned from that. But I just wanted to start by saying a few things. The first being that I'm talking mostly about the political fight, but the reason that we were able to have such a strong campaign is because of the strength of the policy. And I would just start by saying that for folks out there fighting for paid family and medical leave programs, that is critical, the strength of the policy to be able to support our advocacy. And we should only be fighting for these types of policies for more than a decade if they're actually sound and strong and equitable. So the details of the policy are so important, and we had brilliant minds working on it that make developing paid family and medical leave policy seem very seamless. But there is actually a lot that goes into it. So I would definitely recommend having the right voices and experts who are focused on equity and solvency, developing these programs so that we have something sound to fight for. And I'm going to be talking mostly about paid family and medical leave and that journey. But I do want to say that it is the work of that coalition and that advocacy that was directly related to the strength of our paid sick time win and how we ended up with one of the strongest paid sick time policies in the country because of the values that the Paid Family and Medical Leave Coalition held, that really translated to that policy as well. So I want to talk a little bit just about just some of the work that we did on the ballot, and then kind of go in reverse chronological order to talk about the organizing work in that timeline. And, you know, for the ballot measure, we really had to be creative in how we were going to win a ballot during a pandemic, during a time where folks were quarantining and social distancing, and the challenges of collecting signatures during a pandemic, and really having a robust GOTV effort. So that took quite a bit of creativity, and it was successful. We made sure that we collected signatures in a way that made signature collectors and folks signing the petitions feel really safe. We've got some feedback that our campaign had some of the most diligent safety procedures during the signature collection process. We really valued that, just to show people that we're trying to live out the values of the program that we're trying to stand up. I would say that we worked hard to do some deep organizing work during the pandemic. Many of our organizations launched GOTV programs and prioritized Prop 118 in our messaging. Our campaign had an incredible organizing director and organizers working very diligently to set up virtual programs, virtual phone banks and text banks, and those were all really successful. Folks were excited to make calls and talk about the importance of 118. And we did really need to rely heavily on a paid and earned media strategy during the pandemic, which also really resonated with voters. Because this is a really popular issue in Colorado. We've known that for years. We've known that the majority of Colorado workers support paid family and medical leave. And it was just about uplifting this messaging in the right time. Some of our top line messaging that was the most effective was a combination of saying workers need this more than ever, and this is going to help small business. Any organizing, coalition building strategy, definitely the worker and business perspective should go hand in hand, and really be the program should actively be trying to address holistic solutions that will work best for workers and business owners trying to do the right thing. So throughout the ballot campaign, you know, our coalition really worked as a well-oiled machine. We worked hard to get out the vote and just ensure that we were getting the upper hand over opposition messaging. And quite honestly, we were pretty pleasantly surprised to see that we didn't have as much opposition to this program as we had anticipated, which is quite a surprise in a state like Colorado, because for many years, this is one of the most contentious issues in the state when it was a legislative battle. In 2019, for example, paid family and medical leave, when we introduced that bill, it was the most lobbied against bill in the state capitol, with nearly 200 paid registered lobbyists lobbying on this. Just a really oversaturated messaging against that created this narrative that this is not popular, that this won't help workers or business owners. And when we took it to the voters and the ballot, I think we really just saw a shift in that narrative, because for the average person, paid family and medical leave is just extremely common sense, right? Not that many people have a solid argument against letting workers stay home to take care of their loved ones or new child or recover from an illness. So not to say that folks shouldn't be diligent about uplifting the pro sides of the programs. However, you know, just for folks who are going through a similar thing in their states, I know other states are facing pushback in their legislatures. And there is this narrative in that more controlled space about how controversial this issue is. But when we do take it to voters time and time again, we see that this is not a controversial issue to the average voter and constituent. And I think it would be helpful to take lessons from Colorado's win, show that there was bipartisan support throughout various counties, counties that are generally lean Republican or moderate, all really supported this issue. And I think that this is really great evidence to take back to your state legislatures to say, look, like this is not as controversial as some of these corporate lobbyists might make you believe. But I'll let Deborah talk a little bit more about those lessons. And I want to talk just about how the ballot measure went really smoothly on the advocate side, largely in part because we have had a really invested coalition in this issue for more than a decade, advocating for this, building power around this, getting workers and business owners on board, and really trying to build a transformational movement around this, make sure that it's more than just a transactional vote for this and we'll never talk to you again, but actually getting perspectives from people who are directly impacted by this, workers, all different types of stakeholders at the table, businesses, labor unions, economic justice organizations, faith-based organizations. Just really building out a robust coalition was absolutely critical in this win over the years, because we'd been building the drumbeat for so long, but that by the time we got to November 2020, folks have known about this issue for years, and their sentiment is, what are we waiting for? We've been trying to pass this. I'm really excited to get this thing done. And I will say that just the real importance of building a deep, strong coalition is not just to advocate for a strong, equitable program, but to defend against threats to those types of programs, which is something our coalition had done many times, just ensuring that we weren't selling out our communities or making concessions or negotiations that actually wouldn't help the most vulnerable workers, but standing strong on the values and ensuring that the only program that we would accept in our state would be affordable, accessible, and adequate for every single worker in the state. And, you know, I just wanted to give folks a little bit of a visual to just show the years of organizing and movement building that went into this, to really just highlight how this stuff takes time, and it is not easy to win two extremely strong paid leave policies in the same year. And that didn't happen overnight. That happened with years of organizing work and engaging directly impacted folks. So I'd like to share my screen. Can folks see that okay? So I'm gonna go in a little bit of a reverse chronological order, starting in 2020 with our ballot campaign. These are just some images of signature collection. These are our 4 most recent bill sponsors championing on the ballot measure and participating in the signature collection. These are just some photos of community members and advocates during our launch, after we collected all the necessary signatures, just, you know, talking about how important it is to vote for this on the ballot. And because of the, again, being in a pandemic, we really had to just rely on our virtual types of communications, but still wanted to uplift the people who this impacts the most. So we did a lot of robust communications efforts to just uplift the folks who really need this and still hone in on the values of protecting workers first and foremost. In 2019, we introduced this in the legislature. And we see here that we have community members turning out for a rally. We have folks lobbying on paid leave. And what we're going to see throughout this timeline is just kind of similar themes here. And this picture I wanted to uplift. This is me and one of our members at 9 to 5 testifying against a bad paid family and medical leave program that would have caused further inequity in our communities, and just highlighting the importance of that while we're simultaneously advocating for the right thing, that we will have to defend some threats to our communities. Just another instance of a 9-to-5 member who shared their story and pushed this out on many of our digital platforms. Just really highlighting that this is a real issue that's really impacting real people, and that we always try to bring it back to that value. And it's important to bring it back to that value. Sometimes when we're working on policy, we can get just really in the weeds of the policy details and the political negotiations. And I think one of the things that helps us stand strong on creating equitable policy is constantly reminding ourselves that these are real people's lives at stake. This is a documentary screening of 0 Weeks where we did a panel. So just showing over the years, this is 9-to-5 staff and members at Colorado Springs Pride Fest, collecting signatures and photos to boost our communications in support of paid leave. Similarly, in 2018, we have a rally, a lobby day, a screening of 0 Weeks documentary for our legislators, an event to talk about the importance of the family definition at a local establishment in Colorado. And really just trying to highlight here that we've been doing this for years. We're in 2015 having a rally, 2014, all the way back to 2013, talking about celebrating the anniversary of FMLA, but also simultaneously acknowledging that FMLA is not adequate enough for our communities. It's unpaid, it carves out a lot of the workforce, and this is when we start a conversation about needing to do better, and folks really just advocating for the issue. So this is just a little bit of a visual reversed timeline about some of the organizing work that's gone on through the years. So I just can't stress enough before I pass it over to Deborah that building strong, meaningful relationships, building deep coalition with advocates, organizational partners, members, workers, a variety of stakeholders is absolutely critical to upholding the values and standing strong. And without this coalition holding up the values during some really difficult times where we were asked to compromise, we were really at one point at serious risk of introducing an extremely harmful paid leave program in Colorado that might actually exist today if it weren't for folks holding the values. And there's just no way we would have gotten these 2 monumental wins without that organizing work, without staying strong on those values every step of the way. So if folks are interested in talking more about the importance of building that coalition, transformational relationships, I'd be happy to talk more about some of my lessons learned. But yeah, that's just a little bit of the background on some of the organizing and coalition work from the worker side and the economic justice advocate side. And I'll pass it to Deborah to talk a little bit about the business perspective.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashley. It was fun to watch us go back through time. Can you all see my screen? Now I just have to figure out how to make the slides work. You'd never believe I owned a tech company at one point. Okay, so I'm Deborah. I'm the Executive Director of Good Business Colorado. We're an organization of values-driven businesses working to build a more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable Colorado. So we currently have just under 350 members. We're working to build a statewide organization, and we currently have members in 25 of the counties here in Colorado. And the glue that really holds our membership together, because we have a wide range of organizations, of businesses in terms of size and sector and experience with business, but it's the values alignment. And so truly, paid family and medical leave has been a part of our organization since even before our organization existed. As I mentioned, we got involved in the campaign when Neha was the executive director of 9-to-5, and she asked to present to our members before we even had formally incorporated as an organization to say, hey, this is a policy that is of tremendous value to to small businesses. And that stuck with us over the years. So I just really want to lift up the role of organizations and bringing in businesses as a real partner, not as an afterthought of signing on once everything's been baked, but I think the strength of our ability to organize in the way we did over the years really came from that ownership, that we were a partner in the development of the policy. And again, I always just have to say, especially because Good Business Colorado has gotten a lot of accolades for the role that we played in passing Prop 118, but really just the leadership of 9 to 5 and of Ashley and Judith and Neha over the course of over a decade, and those that came before them, is truly why we are here today. And we are very grateful for that. So again, that deep multi-year organizing, our members felt real ownership over the issue because they worked on it for several years. And we had a variety of strategies that we utilize. Is pretty much every thing that Ashley talked about. We were right there with them starting in the 2018 legislative session and thereafter. So whether it was a rally on the steps of the Capitol, whether it was a committee hearing, as Ashley said, we always try to cultivate the right voice of the business owner, whether it was in support of a policy or killing a bad bill. Lobby days we did together. Definitely the theme is the worker, like Ashley said, the worker business owner perspective united on a front, saying that this is actually beneficial to both of us, was really, really important. And I also want to talk a little bit about what we were up against. So when we started working on paid family and medical leave, I'll never forget the first year that we testified. It was literally opposition testimony after opposition testimony coming from large business organizations that basically said, the sky is going to fall. It's going to be the end of the universe. Paid family and medical leave is the worst thing that could ever happen. And the funniest part about this to me is, like, this is back when we had a policy that was 100% paid by employees. That's where we started. And they were still saying the sky is going to fall, right? And this is a screenshot of a COVID survey that the Metro Chamber put out. And I think you can see that there's not even an option here to say, hey, actually, this policy would benefit my business. So the automatic frame they were starting from is that paid family and medical leave is bad for business. Well, we talked to a lot of people, and we talked a lot, and we talked every chance we could get to change the narrative, to the time we got to the point where there was the task force, which we were really proud to have a GBC member, Edwin Zoe of Zomama, representing Good Business Colorado and the small business voice on that task force. But during the public comment period, I thought it was actually highly entertaining to see that both the Colorado Competitive Council and the South Metro Chamber submitted the exact same public comment. But you can see here the shift that occurred in just a couple years, from there being the sky is falling to this broad consensus around even the most conservative business groups that actually paid family and medical leave is good for business. And that was a lot of data that bared out. So huge tip of the hat to everybody on this call who collected data over the years to really demonstrate that it is good for retention, that it's good for the bottom line of businesses to have access to paid family and medical leave for their employees. Okay, here we go again. Can I make this? Okay. And so again, just speaking to what we did at Good Business Colorado, we talked about it a lot. And every time there was a significant shift in the policy, we talked about it. And I think this is really important in that we talked about the things that were the hardest part of the policy for us too. So, and not just the hardest, but when something big changed. So when we made the shift from an entire employee paid policy to a 50-50 split, that was very easy for my members to grasp onto. That was a no-brainer. We had a lot of really hard conversations about job protection. And I think the really most important part is to really frame it from that values standpoint of, we know that if low-wage workers don't have access to job protection, they will not take the leave. So the question for our members is, knowing that, how can we support small businesses? What infrastructure can we put in place to make sure that our businesses are best suited to deal when an employee needs to take leave? And so that was really kind of where we focused. And we talked to a lot of people that were not our members. So we really used that summer of the task force as our opportunity to talk to anyone and everyone. I mean, we approached every business organization, regardless of their political leanings, regardless of their size. And we said, come talk to us with your members. Come talk to us about this policy. And the great news was we no longer had to have the conversation on if paid family and medical leave was a good idea. So we started the conversation from the place of, we know here in Colorado, we need to figure out a way to get an accessible, affordable, and adequate program with a AAA rating to every employer and employee in the state of Colorado. So how do we do that? And that was a real advantage of a place to start versus trying to have that philosophical argument on, is it a good or bad thing? So transitioning to the Prop 118 campaign, which for GBC was an all-encompassing organizational effort. We just touching on the high points of it. So we reached out to a total of 1,201 business owners directly and hundreds more through listservs, Facebook groups, etc. And we're, again, doing this work during the pandemic. So hopefully other states and people that will be working on these campaigns won't be having to deal with this, but we really had to focus on that like hierarchy of needs, especially at a time when so many business owners were just so panicked for their mere survival. And I see that we are getting really close on time. And so I'm just going to skip and say, I have a 14-page report on all the different strategies that we employed and how we ended up getting to a list of over 200 businesses that signed in support of Prop 118. And I'd love to share that with anyone who's interested in getting into the nitty-gritty details. I feel like I'd love to say more about the state tour we did because I think it's so incredibly important. Again, just that like pounding the pavement, getting out there and talking to business owners. Whether or not they are supportive or not, making sure they understand that this policy is on the ballot, what it is, how it'll impact their company. I just can't understate, I think, the value. There's a quote on there from an event we did with all the economic development corporations on the Eastern Plains. And you can say definitely they came in, I think, just philosophically opposed. And through the conversation of understanding what it actually was, we saw a movement where even the executive director of the Phillips County Economic Development Corporation, I get it, you know, this means something to me as a mother. This was a postcard. We distributed hundreds of postcards throughout the state, asking businesses to join us in endorsing. And then the media engagement was huge. I'll definitely send out my slide deck afterwards and would love to lift up, like, this doesn't happen that often, at least in my world. And literally a business owner saying, not only was his mind changed, but he was going to go tell his employees about it. Not that we would ever advocate for any employer to try and tell their employees how to vote, even if it is in our favor. So we're going to show a quick video clip of an ad that was made for the Prop 118 campaign. And then I just wanted to quickly say on what's next. As Jared said, as Ashley said, as Chris is going to say, the education is so important. And again, as an organization that is truly committed to the prosperity of our smallest, most vulnerable businesses, making sure that we can just pound the pavement throughout the state to reach those businesses that are not affiliated with a formal business organization, that aren't on the CDLE listserv, especially business owners for whom English isn't their primary language, to really make sure that they understand the policy and that we really provide resources for them to be able to be successful in making the program successful for their employees. So I'm gonna real quick share the video. And are we going to do both videos right now? Or yes, okay. Maybe, you know, since we definitely want to make sure we have adequate time for Chris and Q&A, maybe should we send the videos in a link after or do them after, just to make sure we have time for Chris and Q&A?
Yeah,
I realize.
And we'll definitely share the ads, which also just highlight, like, these are real people doing real advocacy and putting themselves on the line to advocate for this. So we definitely want to share that with you, but let's pass it to Chris.
Hi, thank you guys. So my name is Chris Garcia. Like I said, I've been working on this piece of legislation here in Colorado since about 2011 when it was first getting started. I became involved in it because I had to take my dad off of life support while I was at work. Unfortunately, at the time, I was a assistant manager. Um, I didn't have access to paid time off, and my dad was coming up on surgery, his fourth quadruple bypass. And he kept putting it off because he wanted me to go down there and spend some time with him. And I did. I put it off as best I could. And the weekend before Father's Day, I was like, you know what? Finally, I'm going to take the time. I'm going to go down there and see him. So I made the trip. I basically saved up my 2 days off from the previous week, took 2 days off from Father's Day week to go down to Texas to be able to spend some time with him. And I got to see him for 3 days. On Sunday, I dropped him off at the hospital and I came back to Denver so that I could be at work on Monday afternoon for my shift. So during this time, instead of being with my dad at the hospital for a major heart operation, I'm at work and I'm only communicating with the doctors through the phone. So in between customers yelling at me for their auto parts, I'm fielding calls from the doctors in Texas asking me to make important decisions about my dad's healthcare. And eventually that Friday, I had to take my dad off of life support because he didn't pull through due to complications, and it really took a toll on me mentally and financially. It put me in a situation where I fell behind on bills. It took me almost 6 months to recover financially because I was also suspended from my job for 3 days because I went to my dad's funeral in Texas, and my dad passed away on a military base. And I didn't know that if you pass away after 5 p.m. on a Friday, they don't actually release the body until 8 a.m. on Monday morning. So this whole time, I lost basically all 3 days for my grievance pay for my dad's funeral because the body wasn't released. So when I got back, I was suspended for an additional 3 days. And so basically I lost almost a week's worth of pay, and financially it set me back. So when I was asked about my experience, I was like, yeah, I totally get this. I didn't realize that I was signing up for almost a 10-year fight. And luckily I was put in touch with 9 to 5, and they've been such a big support. And I think that's one of the things that I would definitely love for people to understand, that it's really hard on workers. They put themselves out there when you're asking them to testify and share their stories. It's their most vulnerable situations that they're sharing with you. Please support them. Like, I was very lucky that I've been around a lot of these great people. So Ashley, Neha, Judith, but also Deborah and a lot of the other coalition members. Like, I've gotten to know them over the last 10 years, and the support that they've been able to give me, not only with my work here at the state level, but now at the national level as well. It's definitely instrumental in being able to continue this fight. Because you open yourself up to a lot of the media bullying that happens. Some people are still employed where they're having those difficulties of having the paid time off issues. So there is retaliation at some of those places. But the having the support of the organization or the coalition is definitely something that's needed most of all. Um, the other thing for me was also the definition of family. I came out when I was 16, so when growing up, my family didn't look the same as everybody else. So for me, when I got involved, an inclusive definition of family was something that was very important to me. the LGBTQ community here in Colorado is fairly large. And that was one of the things that I noticed was in a lot of the earlier years, the LGBTQ community kind of wasn't even like a forethought. It almost felt like it was like we were just trying to pass a bill, but it wasn't a strong inclusive bill. It was something where there was still going to be a lot of people left out. Families like mine were definitely not something that we're even going to be able to use a bill that would have been passed in previous years. You know, currently I have my wife's best friend lives with us, and during my surgeries a couple years ago when I got sick, it was her best friend that took time off to stay home and help me heal. And, you know, a bill like this now would have allowed her to take that time off and have it be paid for being able to stay home and take care of me. So, you know, definitely the inclusive language is something that, you know, to consider, especially as we start to see multi-generational families living together because of rising housing costs. The other reason for inclusive family is under FMLA, like my brother was not considered, you know, to be somebody that would fall under, you know, a standard definition of family. It's your parents and, you know, your children. So siblings would not be covered. So just expanding that definition of family to include those around you that you care for, that you're gonna want to be there for those moments. Is something that was also really important for us. And then the other thing I really want to talk about is the importance of investing in the implementation and education piece. Because one of the things that I found being as part of this coalition, I've gotten to travel and speak in other states that have passed paid family leave as well. And one of the things that I found so surprising is that there's people that are in other states that have passed paid family leave. And when I've talked to friends that are in those states, they had absolutely no idea that they had even access to paid family leave. So I think, you know, when we're talking about like funding and we're talking about, you know, getting money to work on these campaigns, that one of the things that is focused on is getting the win is great, but that win is just a starting point. One of those things that you're going to need to think about is, okay, you've got the win, but now what? How do we make it so that people can start to implement it? You know, like Deborah said, the smaller businesses, the ones that aren't, you know, involved in the bigger business, like coalitions or organizations. How do we get more people to understand the legislation that is passed? And for workers, I mean, for like myself, like I talk to all of my coworkers about it, but how do we educate, you know, all workers so that they know what they have available to them? You know, and I think my other takeaway from this is using our wins to help other states and other coalitions across this country. You know, we're here to help. It's like, I think all of us have continued to build this network, working with other states and with organizations across this country that have not only worked on and passed successfully, but some that are still working on passing legislation. And, you know, building this network of people that you can come and talk to, because ultimately we want the national paid family leave to use really kind of what we've taken and use us as models to build the best paid family leave for everyone. Right now, the way I see it is, you know, you shouldn't have to win the lottery to.
Chris, did you cut out?
No, well, hopefully Chris will be able to reconnect in a moment, but I was weighing in on some of the Q&A. There were a few questions that came in. So in our remaining moments, if folks have other questions that you want to add either in the chat or the Q&A function, happy to share some thoughts. But We'll also be sharing a lot of these resources and some of the other things we've talked about in a follow-up email with all of our emails as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great question about how we can take Colorado's lessons on sticking with strong policies to push federal leave toward advocating for a strong policy, thinking of Family Act losing job protections and lacking progressive wage replacement. How can state lessons help them think bigger and show that thinking bigger can be practical and solvent? I think my two main takeaways would be, one, like if you're connected to these national advocacy efforts, your voice in advocating to connect with the states who have done this and the advocates on the ground to work together on this is invaluable, right? Like for those of us who have passed paid leave programs now, anything that happens federally has to seamlessly tie into our state programs. The states are the ones who did it first, and we have important knowledge, and we should be part of those conversations. And I think it's never too early to start organizing around paid leave, having these conversations, and being direct about what bottom lines are and what equity is. Everyone supports paid leave in theory. Donald Trump supports paid leave in theory. But what does that mean on paper? What are the details? And how are we always bringing the conversation back to are the details rooted in equity? So those are my quick takeaways.
Should we show the videos real quick, or were there other questions in the chat box?
Just that we'll definitely be able to share the materials from the presentation. And yeah, at our last minute, we'd love to show you these ads.
And thanks everybody for making the time and joining. And we're happy to be resources as we, as you go forward in your work.
Okay, this one's up first. I'll just,
After 22 years of dreaming, we started this brewery. Our people are like family, and we want to take care of them.
But offering paid family and medical leave is tough on our own. That's why we support Proposition 118. It helps businesses like ours provide affordable paid leave. For less than the cost of a pint per week, we can cover an employee.
We're all adapting right now. 118 is exactly what we need to keep going.
Vote yes on 118.
Oh dear. Come on. Okay, here we go.
You teach them to wash their hands and look both ways. But as a mom, you don't expect your child to get cancer. Corey needs me right now, but I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and my job doesn't offer paid leave. So I'm keeping us afloat instead of holding his hand.
Hi, Corey.
I gladly pay a few bucks a week so I don't have to choose between the bills and my son's final days. I saw his first breath. 118 means not missing his last.
Thanks for sharing. I know we're over time, so in our last 10 seconds, I will just say that the purpose of uplifting these ads is to show like it takes a lot of work to get real people to film ads, to put themselves on the line, potentially face pushback and retaliation. And again, it just exemplifies our deep organizing and community with workers and voters and business owners to show them the importance that they're willing to put themselves on the line, willing to do that labor, and willing to take that time. And again, that came from that deep relationship building and people feeling really invested in ownership over these wins and ensuring that we have these strong programs in Colorado. So with that, unless Jared and Deborah, you have any final thoughts, I will give you all your time back. Thank you so much for joining us. Please feel free to reach out to any of us to connect, to talk about lessons, how they can translate to your efforts. We're happy to be a resource and looking forward to connecting on this fight in the future. Thank you all so much.